Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cosmic Leadership Podcast. I am so very honored to have with us Dr. Jolene Brighten today. I basically have read everything that she's ever written, but her last book in particular piqued my interest. It's hormonal things that we talk about so much on this podcast. And her new book is called Is This Normal? I can't wait for you all to read it so that we can discuss. Dr. Jolene Brighten NMD is a hormone expert, nutrition scientist, and thought leader in women's medicine. She's board certified in naturopathic endocrinology. How cool is that for all of us to listen to today? And trained in clinical sexology. Dr. Brighten is the author of Is This Normal? A non-judgemental guide to creating hormone balance, eliminating unwanted symptoms, and building the sexual desire you crave. A fierce patient advocate and completely dedicated to uncovering the root cause of hormonal imbalances, Dr. Brighten empowers women worldwide to take control of their health and their hormones through her website and social medical channels. Dr. Brighten is an international speaker, clinical educator, and medical advisor within the tech community. And I have to also say, medical advisor to so many of us who have been down the rabbit hole of various hormonal situations in our lives. And we just find your social media impact to be so incredible. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Brighten.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for those kind words. It's something that I very much feel like no matter what my relationship is with somebody, whether they buy my book, whether, they purchase my supplements, whether, any of that, I always want people to feel supported. No matter, what they come across, that they feel supported and they get information that helps them. So I appreciate you saying that, because as anyone who is on social media knows, it is quite a bit of work, but it is so very rewarding to hear all the stories and the lives that you're able to change.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks also to the fact that we live in such a global world now. My background was working for the UN in various countries, and I didn't really have access to medical care. I actually didn't have a gynecologist for about 10 years. There was, the occasional trip to Thailand to get refills on my birth control, but
Mhm.
really not much else. And so for those of us that are in that situation, or those of us who live rurally, it's so helpful to be able to go to social media and to read about something that may be affecting us so that we can then be more informed the next time we get to see a gynecologist. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that I really appreciate you saying all of that. Not a lot of people acknowledge that access to healthcare, access to food, is an issue across the
Mhm.
board. And so, so often I will talk about things and I get people who jump on and they're like, well, everybody should just eat organic. And I'm like, not everybody has access to that. Everyone should just go to their doctor. I grew up in a small little mountain town where if you wanted to see a specialist, you needed to drive an hour to go see a
Mhm.
specialist. So when you think about somebody who's not feeling good and then they have to commute like 2 hours,
I
it's
know.
exhausting. All of it is exhausting. And I mean, I don't know how old you are. I'm in my 40s.
Me
So
too.
I'm still in awe of how amazing the internet is and how I wrote Is This Normal? Because when I was growing up and I going through puberty and navigating my body and all the like weird, is this normal or not questions that would come up
Right.
about myself, there were not books even in the library. And yes, everybody listening, like that, I was like doing decimal in my way to information and not finding what I needed. And so a lot of this book, I mean, I say my patients, my readers, my social media followers, they wrote this book because it's all of their questions.
Mhm.
And I'm answering those in detail and providing guidance that is the culmination of this book. And yet this book is like everything that I really wish that I would have had. Like so many things that have come up with patients where they're like, is this normal? And I'm like, I remember when I was asking that question. Like, I
Yeah,
remember this.
absolutely. And that's the other thing too, is I feel like we do live in this modern world and a lot has changed over the last couple of years. And we do have more access to information because everything has been forced to go online throughout the
Mm-hmm.
last few years. But there are still things that, if you ask your traditional or clinically trained gynecologist who may not be into the more functional medicine perspective like you are, they may not quite follow what you're talking about. So I know in your supplement line, you have all kinds of different beautiful things for us, those of us who have hormonal disruption. I'm also in my 40s and I'm perimenopausal. And there can be times, even if you do have access to medical care, even if you live next door to a gynecologist, that they may just not have that functional medicine perspective. They may turn more towards allopathic medicine, which is life-saving, but it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily fix the root cause.
Yes. And I think one of the biggest issues is that we know that nutrition has a huge impact on our life. Like you eat this food and
Right.
then it becomes your cells, like it
Right.
becomes you. And yet medicine has for a very long time said diet doesn't do anything,
Mhm.
except that if you get diabetes, then diet's your fault. Then it's
Right.
your fault. There's so much shame around our bodies, and as much shame as there is about how our bodies function, about our sexual health, there's equally shame about our choices and what's our fault and what's not our fault. Um, and really, it's always just, it's such a perplexing thing for people to shame and blame because of nutrition choices. So that's something that I do very different is I actually have a degree in nutrition. Most doctors do not have sex education for themselves in their training beyond pregnancy and STI
Right.
prevention and treatment of that. And so you have to keep in mind that when they come into the room, if you haven't, and like, look who I'm preaching to the choir here, if you
Yeah.
have not dealt with your own shame, if you have not dealt with your own issues with sexual health,
Mhm.
with sex in general, you bring your baggage into the room with the
Very
patient.
true.
And that is why I pursued sex counseling training and have spent a lot of time with that. And in that, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, is you have to do a lot of work. Like you're taking courses that are all about sexual reassessment. Like you have to assess yourself, and
Mhm.
then you need to actually reassess, like who you are when you go through this training multiple times to make sure you don't bring that baggage with you. And so for people to understand a lack of education by your provider and their own shame can bring in this feeling like I'm not doing enough or my provider isn't going to be able to help me, and all of these kind of negative feelings, which is it's complex, it's also unfair, and it's also the
Mhm.
reality of working with a human. Your doctor is a human, and as you're right, there are offering life-saving care. There are definitely situations where allopathic medicine is the medicine that you need.
Right.
But I think the problem is when it's a we're the best, like only allopathic all day, every day. And it really disempowers the patient because the
Mhm.
majority of what keeps you out of the doctor's office, that keeps you healthy, that helps you avoid chronic disease, is what you do every single day. You have the power in so many ways to really care for yourself. But our whole system and paradigm has really been positioned to say, you need a doctor. You must have a doctor, and you have to do what your doctor says and listens to your doctor. And unfortunately, there's a lot of like gaslighting that happens and all of that.
Yes.
I actually, this might resonate with you. This might resonate with your audience, but I was making this observation. I am not judging other mothers, so let me just say that. But I was at the park, and actually, these were nannies that were at the park, and I have a toddler, and these toddlers were falling down, and immediately the nannies would say, "You're okay, you're okay,"
Right.
which they want them to be okay, and they want them to feel safe. And I was just watching this. I always ask my son, "Are you okay?" And he stops, he checks in, and he says, "Yeah," like, which
Right.
is so cute because he's like 19 months. And it's so cute. And I was like, this is how gaslighting starts. Like, this
Exactly.
is the beginning, and how subtle it is of how we start to not trust our body. Because if no one gives you the opportunity to check in with your body, or you're hurt, but this person you trust that cares for you is telling you you're okay, who do you listen to? Do you listen to yourself, or do you listen to the nanny? And the nanny has the best intentions. And it just was this really big aha moment of like how we find ourselves in the doctor's office being like, I'm not okay. This is not normal. And
Right.
our doctor's like, you're okay. Well, who do I listen to? Because I trust this person. They have my best interest. They want me to be okay, but I don't feel okay.
I agree so fully. I think that a large part of my work also is making sure that people are checking in with themselves like you encourage your son to do in the park, because we have this authority issue, especially I feel in this particular country here in the US, where we tend to trust an authority figure above our own knowing.
Mm,
And it's not our fault. You know, we grew up this way. A lot of it is socio-cultural conditioning that trains us
hmm
to believe that other people know more about how we feel than we do. Yes, for sure, a doctor knows more about what is happening with me hormonally because they can run tests and they can read the labs and do all of those kinds of things. But I am the one who has to know when something is off. And I'm
hmm
the one who has to advocate for myself and make sure that we figure out what's wrong. And I find, especially with the shame piece in my private practice, I'm a trained therapist, a trained neuroscientist, but I ended up leaving a lot of that behind to run my practice with the spiritual component because
hmm
it helps people get in touch with that intuition. And when you feel into your intuition, if there's any shame there whatsoever, that is not yours. That was put on you by societal conditions or religion or perhaps other people in your world. We're not
hmm
born with shame. So if there's sexual shame going on, or if there's shame going on about your body and having your hormones be out of whack for some reason, um, that's something to really examine, because a lot of times you are eating healthy, you are having access to organic food and eating the right things. And I mean, I can speak for myself. I've been doing seed cycling since I read about it in your book, um, 2 books ago, I believe, right? Maybe one before.
Beyond the pill. Yeah,
Yeah.
the one before. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and things can still be off. And a lot of that, I believe, is so due to internal mechanisms, our emotional
hmm
state, our mental state, the amount of shame we're carrying or the trauma that we're carrying. And I loved how in your new book, in Is This Normal, you talk a lot about that. And I wanted to get into some of the sexual things that you discuss in your book because I thought it was absolutely fascinating. So, trigger warning for those that are listening: if you have the kids in the car, please turn this off, listen at another time. We really want you to have this information. It's so important for your overall health. Can you talk to us a little bit about the orgasm gap?
Totally. I just have to like laugh real quick though. If anyone's ever seen Sex Education on Netflix,
Yeah,
you're giving the trigger warning. My 10-year-old is hearing everything.
of
We
course.
there are conversations that I'm like, I'm not ready for that with you. But I was just telling just before this podcast, I said to my husband, he is the Otis to my Gene, and this is just what I have to accept. So for all of you, and I just trust that he does ask me questions. We have a very open relationship in that way. But as you did the trigger warning, I was like, yeah, memo to the small human dwelling somewhere. Sometimes he'll just go outside my door and listen, and I'm like, okay,
Mm.
we're talking about all of this. Yeah. So, in Is This Normal? I love that that means you read the introduction. If you
Of
caught
course.
the whole shame talk, not
I
a
read
lot
the
of people
whole
don't read
book.
introduction.
I
Oh,
read the
that's
whole book, and I was
amazing.
so honored to receive the whole book. I was so grateful to your assistant for sending it over. It's incredible. And I'm a very fast reader. I have to also give that caveat. It was incredible.
That's amazing because it's a big book. It's like
Yes.
400 pages. The audiobook is like 15 hours.
Great.
It's like it is not holding anything back. And for people listening, I do give nutrition tips in there,
Yes.
but we had to make a tough decision, and there is no meal plan and there are no recipes in this book because it is so information packed. So let me
Mhm.
just say that if you go to drbrighten.com/ITM resources, ITM dash resources, I do have a meal plan and I have recipes for you. My editor was like, we're
Yay.
not putting it in because we're not sacrificing all of this. And I was like, I just feel like if you're going to have a program and it talks about nutrition, having some framework is absolutely necessary. So it's a bonus that goes with the book. So if you get the book, that goes together with the program. And as I talked about in the introduction, some of the very first things that we're ever taught about our body is that it's a source of shame. So
Mhm.
pooping, peeing, those are shameful things. Vaginal discharge, vaginal odor, having your period, and then sex, of course, right?
Right.
And so some of that does lend itself into the orgasm gap. So what is the orgasm gap? In the book, I say, it's really the differential between men and women in a heterosexual relationship, the frequency of their orgasm. And it's so great that like not even the greatest daredevil of the world could jump that gap, because
Right.
what we see is that men are orgasming almost all the time, almost every time. And whereas women, they're only hitting in the 60% of the time are they orgasming. And a big reason for that is, yes, shame, but it's not just shame. So I don't want people to think it's like, oh, because people are ashamed. It's because the shame of society made it so that we didn't talk about the clitoris. We didn't talk about what is going on down there. And I think, very quickly there are people who will either be like, men are the worst.
Right.
Okay, so I get this. Men are the worst. They're just selfish and they just want what they want in the bedroom. Okay, some are true. So in some instances, that's true. And then we get people that are like, why are we shaming men? And really my stance is that no man wants to be left out of this knowledge. And
Right.
it's made them the butt of many jokes that they really shouldn't be. Like, oh, a man can't find it. Like I should probably Google like the jokes that come up, because there's just so many around a man not being able to help a woman achieve an orgasm. And in addition to that, men are very interested. This is one of the top search things on Google, is how to make a woman come. That is what people are searching. So people want to know this information. And so when I say shame, it's not a you issue, it's a society issue. So I take you through in the book explaining the history of how the clitoris was actually removed from medical textbooks. So not even your doctor got all the information. We just had a study that needs to be replicated showing there's about 10,000 nerve endings. Like just had a study in like the last 6 months come out saying, so for people who are listening, that's 2022, saying there's about 10,000 nerve endings in the clitoris. Before that, everybody would say, oh, there's like 8,000, there's double what's in the penis. That was based on a cow. We only had information based on a cow. Like what? Like what? And so why? Because we didn't study women's bodies. We cut women's bodies out of anatomical texts. We essentially blinded doctors. Like doctors don't even have all of this information, and then they're out there doing labiaplasty and like cutting things up down there so that they're prettier to who? Oh, so they look like a Barbie. Wait, who invented Barbie? Like, no, like Barbie doesn't even have genitals. Like what is going on here? And then I talk through the issues with like in psychology, like Freud, like literally the worst thing that ever happened to women's medicine.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm like, that guy sucks so hard. Like, he literally was like, the clitoral orgasm is infantile, and like the vaginal orgasm is what women should be trying to achieve. And I'm like, okay, let's say it. Let's say what you really mean, which is, I want my penis to always have access to a vagina, and for her to act like that's the greatest thing that ever happened to her. And if she doesn't have an orgasm because of penile penetration, she's broken. Something's wrong with her. It's not neat. Like, Freud, you're so insecure. Like, I don't understand.
I know. He was a drug
really
addict
funny.
also, too. Like, when in the world do we ever read books by known drug addicts and say, oh, yes, this is excellent information?
Yeah, I take women through all of that in the book, and the reason why I do is for you to understand that the journey to becoming like the pleasurable sexual being you want to be and getting the pleasure you deserve, it has not been made easy by society, because every bit of messaging along the way, whether that messaging is coming from the media, it's coming from marketers, it's coming from your doctor, it has been wrought with shame and chipping away at you that like something must be wrong with your body. And so often patients come to me with everybody thinks it's their hormones, and it can be your hormones. But the thing is that we don't talk about all the other aspects of sexual health and how complex women are. Instead, medicine took the male body as the standard, which is so dumb. Male body is the standard. And then we've got reproductive accessories included for baby making over here, this inferior model. And yet we're so different in so many
We
ways,
are.
and in so many ways. And that also includes our sexual health. And yet, what is and it's so confusing because so I talk in the book, there's an entire chapter about libido, and I talk about spontaneous and responsive desire. Some people are spontaneous in that you're walking around, you're thinking about sex all the time, or there just needs to be a hint of like sexual innuendo, and you're like, "Ooh, like
Yeah.
maybe I'm getting aroused, maybe I'm like into this," and that's what we see as like the male default, and that
Mhm.
is how it's supposed to be, right? That's the ideal. Except that if you're a woman who's owning that, if you outright own that, like I'm into sex, I like to have sex, I like to orgasm, ooh, you should be ashamed of that because you're like a man. Like, what?
I
Which way do
know.
you want it? Whereas we've got the responsive desire, which is when I always say, like, things have to get going for things to get going. Like, you're
Right.
not going to be walking around just fantasizing. You're not going to be at the supermarket and see like someone attractive on a magazine and be like, oh, I'm very much like feeling something stirring in me right now. Like, it takes you, being, with someone that you trust, and things like moving in the direction of what you need. And I'm being kind of ambiguous in this because it can look a lot of different ways for people. Some people want a massage, some people want to be kissed, some people just want to have a very intimate conversation. Like, we're all into different things. But
Right.
those things have to get moving before the nervous system and the genitals start communicating. And now you're like, I am into sex. And that is also normal.
Right. And I love that in the book you normalize all of that, that you can be one of those people who looks at the cover of a magazine and says, "Ooh, that person is hot, I'm ready." Or you can be a person who needs a really in-depth conversation to feel it at
Mm-hmm.
all. That is all okay and it's all normal. And I think that so many of us have grown up with we're around the same age. I'm in my 40s as well. And I remember growing up with the messaging of it should be more towards the look at a magazine and suddenly you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Um, and I think,
Maybe like, and let me just say, like, maybe when you're younger, maybe when you're ovulating, maybe when you're
Mhm.
already in like a new relationship, like these things can
Right,
shift throughout your lifetime.
right.
So maybe, and so that's the thing of like, maybe that's true for you in one moment, and then things shift, and that's not totally true for you. And that's also normal. Sorry, I cut you off. What were you going to say
No, no,
next?
that was an excellent ad. Thank you. I also think a lot of it is up to that particular day, right? So when I was in school for
Yes.
neuroscience, we learned so much about the neurotransmitters and how you're feeling. And if you are completely full of stress and you're having the worst day,
Yeah.
perhaps you won't be able to get there. And that's
Hmm.
okay too. It's also about your own mental state, your own neurotransmitter, and your neural pathways, and the things that are going on around you. And I like that you
Hmm.
also talked about that in the book too, because I think a lot of us
Yes.
demand that we act as robots, and it's
Oh.
just not possible.
Right? Because like what it's like, one of the analogies we're told is like, it's like a light switch, turn her on, turn her off. It's
Hmm.
not like a light switch, it's like a dimmer switch. Like, you can ramp it
Yeah.
up and you can ramp it down. And that's really like, if you have that in your mind, that's what the totality of the interactions of the day can do for you, especially if you're in a partnered relationship. And I so often find myself explaining this so that men understand that they can be doing things that is causing that dimmer switch to go up, up, up. What is that? The brain is getting more open, more receptive to those signals. But they can also be doing things that are dimming it down. And what is that? That's increasing stress. That's doing things that basically block the signal. And so as a woman, again, we're very complex in terms of like, we're not linear in sex, we're
Right.
not linear in arousal, we're not linear. Okay. And there's a lot of inputs that we are receiving from the environment that influence sex and influence our hormones. And so as those inputs are coming in, one of the things that your body is doing, and so your brain, the master sexual organ, nervous system, and body, is really scanning and saying, am I safe? Is it safe? Is it
Hmm.
dangerous? If you're getting danger signals, if you're having stress signals all the time, because like, I mean, we think we're evolved because we got the internet, right? But like, we're not that evolved. Our system doesn't know. Your boss was yelling at you, but you're not going to die, versus a tiger was growling at you and you might die. Like, your body doesn't know that. And so when we have all those stress inputs, that is going to throw off your hormones for sure. And so in the book, I have a pyramid. I had to set down. I think it's I did this podcast. I just happened to grab my cosmic mug that has all the
Oh, nice.
constellations on it. And I was like,
Perfect.
oh. So in the book, I talk about the pyramid. This is how I explain hormones. And there's a pyramid, and the base of your pyramid, that is going to be your adrenal hormones. So that's where fight and flight hormones come from, cortisol, your stress hormone, but also your insulin. Those are very tied. And that foundation has to be right, because right above that is your thyroid. And at the very tippy top is estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. And those are the three hormones that like cyclically are troublemakers, like if they're
Mm-hmm.
out of whack. And but so often people are like, oh, I want to fix my estrogen. I just have to work on my thyroid. And they don't realize that this whole metabolic stress sleep base that
Right.
has to be tended to. And in tending to that, we can optimize our hormones, but also if you're tending to that stress response, and really the ideal, like, look, you can't control stress. So much of your stress is going to be out of your control.
Yeah.
Control what you can, but outside of that, build your resiliency so that when stress happens, the system's got a little more play to push back on that.
Mm-hmm.
That can do wonders for your sex life, like so much. And in part of that stress resiliency, we have to talk about the fact that we've got to communicate to our partner. So most of the people who come to me complaining about issues with libido, arousal, orgasm, they're in partnered relationships. And the reality is that cohabitating with another person is not easy. It's really not. It's not easy. I always think about like hunter gatherers. I'm like, they would have went away for a while and then came back. Like you would have breaks, right? But it isn't easy, and so it's one of the least sexiest things in people's mind to be like, you have to talk about stuff, and but it's the thing that like, if you have great communication in your relationship and you can talk about that hard stuff, you're more
Mm-hmm.
apt to talk about stuff in the bedroom.
Right.
And so in the 28-day program, I'm taking women through like tracking your cycle as it relates to your hormones, your sexual health, building out your list and your what is true for me
Right.
manual so that you know what's your normal. And in that, I give like, around ovulation is a really great time to experiment with things. You're going to be like less self critical. You're going to be more into things that you're doing. Your nipples are going to be sensitive. Your clit is going to swell on command in most cases. And like you'll be
Mm-hmm.
able to get to an orgasm so much quicker. And to actually write down the things that did it for you, like what works for you, and carry those into the luteal phase, because in the luteal phase, well, your progesterone comes up, and that can make it so that you're better at tending to community, you're better at communicating. It can also be problematic in terms of it's dampening the effects of the other hormones and your ability to get in the mood and your ability to
Right.
be aroused. And that can sometimes be conflict for partners. And then as you get even closer to your period, that like PMS comes in, you're like, oh, are they chewing with their mouth open again? Like I can hear the chips. Like it's stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like we laugh about it because it's so
It's
relatable
so
and so
true.
true.
It's so true.
And are you really irritated by that? Like in the moment, you're going to be like, hell yes. And I'm going to throw like something across the room at them. And yet, if you take a little break, it's probably not that. It's probably other things that, unless you're like, you have sensory processing issues and like you happen to have noise sensitivity, then maybe that's true for you.
Right.
Um, I'm that person. I'm like, it doesn't matter what day of the month it is. Like, if you're making noise, I'm like, please, let's make less noise, everybody. But
Right.
just to say that, these things that you learn about yourself in the ovulatory phase and going through that, you can carry with you and have that communication with your partner so that there's not conflict, there's not strife, and there is still pleasure, should you choose it, in that luteal phase.
Absolutely. And I really loved the 28-day keeping track of everything. I'm doing that this month. So I'll let you know how it
Awesome.
goes.
Yeah, I'd love to
Um,
hear.
but also all of the things that Dr. Brighten was just saying also holds true for our queer couples. Just because you're in a queer partnership, you may still be ready to throw something across the room when your partner is chewing with their mouth open. There may be such desire discrepancy between the two of you, even though you may have the same gender, that these things still apply. So I
You won't
also
have the orgasm gap issues though, friends.
true. That's well,
So,
I
if you look
actually
at the
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, I was going
Sorry.
to say, if you look at the research, same-sex relationships, the orgasm gap so much smaller compared to heterosexual relationships. So when we talk about the orgasm gap being problematic, I want to just say to everybody, that's why we've been talking about more of that heteronormative model, because that's
Right.
really where the problems exist. Not that they can't exist in a same-sex couple. There's actually this creator on TikTok, Ria, who I just think is amazing. And she put up this video of her and her wife. And like, she's like, sometimes, like doing this cute little voice, sometimes relationships be like, and her partner Amber's like loving on her and everything. And then she's like, and sometimes relationships be like, and then her partner's like pushing her off the bed, like across the room. I died laughing and I had to duet it because I'm like, what are we looking at? Ovulatory phase. Ooh, get over here. I'm like so into you. Like,
Yeah.
oh, cuddle me. Like everything like is wonderful. And then we're looking at late luteal phase, which is when your body's like, look, like, so here's the thing, whether or not you want to have a baby, your biology is like always trying to make that happen. And that's what those hormones are doing. And so it's always like, how do I get like more sexual activity? Like that's what I want. But once you've passed that ovulatory phase, the hormones are like, we're good. All right.
Yeah.
We're good. We're out of that phase. But that's where we can find ourselves irritable, repulsed by our partner.
Mhm.
Yes. And that is true no matter how you identify, what kind of relationship you're in, and non-sexually, it's true as well. I talk about it in the book with coworkers, and I talk about it with children, because like I just feel like people sometimes get really triggered by that. I kind of giggle because I'm like, that's next week for me. I'll be in that late luteal phase with my children,
Right.
and I'll be like, seriously, you guys, like, can you just like stop screaming, stop fighting, like, and it's like all that gentle parenting of like, let me is so hard to do.
I imagine.
And so understanding like this applies to any relationship, any experience. I mean, this can be with the checker at the grocery who's like snapping her bubble gum,
Mhm.
or like is like, oh, I have to do a price check or I don't. And you're like, I'm so impatient right now. And that can be that like untended to stress that's been going on and the hormonal shifts that result from that.
Right. And that's our time to really dive into that intuitive sense that we were talking about earlier. And okay, I can see that I'm irritable. I can visualize myself calming down. I'm going to do a meditation. I'm going to go for a walk, whatever you need to do to help with that.
For the
I
moms out there, I will say the new thing that I've been employing is when my oldest child has pandas. It's an
okay.
autoimmune condition of the brain. So
Mhm.
he actually just went into a flare, which he regresses. He acts more like a toddler, but he's 10 and he's physical like a 10-year-old. It's just like, I mean,
Yes.
it is a high stress situation. And this last week, I just started with like, okay, I can feel my feet on the ground. Like I can hear my toenails as I rub them across the carpet. Like, oh, my hands, I'm rubbing my hands together and just tuning into my senses and trying to bring it back to me because it's so easy for your energy to become frenetic and for you to fall into other people's drama, other people's stories, the stress of something,
Mhm.
and feel like you need to match that. I think that's normal. You're the neuroscience expert. I think it's normal to start to match people in your
It's
environment,
true.
but trying
Yeah.
to pull in the senses back to yourself, that's just my share that's been working and I've been it's working really well for the last month, but in the last week I've really been doing it of like, I can feel my hair on my neck right now, I can feel cold air brushing across my legs, like just coming back to me and being
Mhm.
like, this is my body, okay, so what's
Right.
my experience now?
That mindfulness based meditation helps a lot of people, I think. Also, just
Mm-hmm.
because it's our quickest way to get back into our bodies when we're at that point that we're so agitated, we tend to disassociate a bit. Not, I'm not saying pathological disassociation. I'm just saying minor disassociation where we decide, okay, this is too irritating to be in my body right now. I'm going to go somewhere else, think about something else. But if we can bring it back to the body, that can actually change the course of some of our neurotransmitters to help us start calming down. I
Mm-hmm.
also liked that you talked about the cortisol connection in our states of arousal and how it can be more difficult to become aroused if we're in a state of high cortisol, our stress hormone, when those types of things amp up. And so I loved your share about what's working for you lately. I can feel my hair on my neck. I can hear my toenails on my carpet. I think that will be really helpful for our listeners. If we could,
And you can use that in sex too. So
that's
when you
true.
start getting distracted, or a very common thing for women to do is to spectator. So we disassociate from our body and we start observing our body.
Right.
What does my cellulite look like right now? Can they see my rolls? What is my body like in this position? Trust, they are not paying attention to that if we're engaging in sex, but we are. And so coming back to like, just what are the sensations? I can feel, warm touch here. Like I can smell this. So just coming back into your senses can really help with being present, not losing your arousal, and being able to achieve orgasm. And this, if you are neurodivergent listening to this, this is especially true for you. Women in the ADHD community, they complain, and they may not even know they have ADHD, but they complain about how sex gets boring, about how like they get distracted easily. Mindfulness, like make it your practice, but coming back and like really tuning the mind and changing the mind. Sometimes you have to spice it up too, and you have to bring different things in just to keep you present.
Right.
But this is just something we don't talk a lot about in our society, is being present and tuning in. And as you've been talking about, like that intuition around things as well. We're talking about this in the context of sex, but these are also my patients who come to me who know something's wrong, even after every lab test and doctor has told them nothing's wrong. They're very tuned into their body, and they're like, it's my intuition is telling me something's wrong. And I'm like, if you like, honing your intuition is such an important thing to do, and never should anybody say, like, just dampen that and really have you cut ties with that.
I absolutely agree. The foundation of my work, yes, our intuition can lead us to where we need to go next. And I've even found that intuition can start to lead you towards different practitioners that you're meant to work with that can help you with whatever is happening. And on that point, I wanted to just change focus a little bit towards endometriosis, because I know that a lot of our listeners here struggle with endometriosis. I struggle with endometriosis. And it is a condition that really didn't get much research until, I don't know, you can tell me, but probably 20 years ago.
It still doesn't.
Yeah.
No, it still does not have enough research. It still is underdiagnosed. I have, so the chapter on sex of all kinds, as we call it, when I'm talking about sex of all kinds, that chapter, I started with a story about pain with sex and going through all of that. And my editor was like, is this like really, like, you're like, this is a book about, like, this is a chapter about sex. Is this where we start with pain? And I'm like, pain is so disregarded and dismissed in women, and pain down there even more so, because a lot of doctors are like, you're not going to die if you have pain when you have sex. You're not going to die. Okay, this is true, but you're also not going to fully live. And that's what we're really here to do. And so I started off talking about the issues of pain with sex, because if we're going to talk about vaginal intercourse, we have to recognize that 1 in 3 women have experienced pain with sex in their lifetime. And for some women, endometriosis or adenomyosis, which is kind of like the cousin or sister of endometriosis, that is something that may show up with pain with sex. It may not show up with as painful periods, or painful periods you might be told that's totally normal. You might not have some of the other symptoms, but it could be showing up with pain with sex. And so I have a whole checklist for you to go through, and intention there is that you take that to your doctor. It's very hard for them to ignore when you have a list in front of you. Here's all the things that I'm dealing with. And it's very hard for them to gaslight you when you have it written down, because they'll sometimes say, it's not as bad as you're remembering it. It's not as bad as you think. And you look and you're like, no, it's bad.
It's bad.
It's bad. Like, I know how bad it is. So endometriosis is seriously still not getting the attention it deserves. It still is taking so many women more than a decade to get diagnosed. And I take big issue with that because, you know, as we were talking about like being in a rural community and like you have to drive an hour to see a doctor and that's like
Mm-hmm.
2 hours just in the car. Now imagine you have pain, like how much worse is it to be sitting in a vehicle? But it doesn't even have to be rural. Like doctors, I don't feel like really take to heart time lost.
Right.
Time lost going from doctor to doctor to doctor, time lost sitting in medical visits, time lost in researching your symptoms, researching doctors. How about
Mm-hmm.
time of your life lost? You're
Right.
never going to get that back. Like partnerships that are lost, like there are women who they can't get pleasure with their partner because they don't, you know, they have a lot of pain, or because like they are, you know, still being taught, and you know, it still very much is like the paradigm that like it must be penetrative sex
Right.
for it to be sex, and not recognizing that there's a whole lot of ways for people to get to pleasure
Mm-hmm.
that don't include penetration of the vagina. But people have lost out on relationships, on work, on business opportunities, on being mothers, like all of these things because of a doctor saying, I don't think it's that bad, or I'm
Exactly.
not going to work you up. And that's highly problematic.
I agree. And I think that even if you do have access to incredible doctors, I can just share this personal story. It's a bit out there, but I had endometriosis probably for about 10 years before I was diagnosed. And I also have adenomyosis. And so it is invading certain parts of my body that are not even near my uterus. And because of the lack of research and the lack of, knowing what to do about this, I did see so many gynecologists until finally being diagnosed. And what got
Mm-hmm.
me diagnosed actually was that I was having 10-day periods. I was getting on a flight to go visit my best friend in Amsterdam with an adult diaper. It was at the point where I needed to wear an adult diaper for the flight because I could not change my pad every 30
Mm-hmm.
minutes, which I needed to do. And then finally, a cyst burst while I was visiting another friend in Austria, and I had surgery. And that was the first time I was diagnosed with endometriosis. It has progressed since then, unfortunately, but
Mm-hmm.
I just beg the medical community, to anyone who is listening, to do their research on endometriosis and know how to diagnose, because all of that didn't used
Mm-hmm.
to happen. And I was living in New York City. If you struggle to get a diagnosis in New York City, now I live in New Mexico and we have 0 endometriosis specialists. I have to go to Colorado to see someone.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a case of like, just even if they just read your books, they would be able to diagnose and start to be able to help, or at least recommend you to a specialist.
Exactly. That piece right there, acknowledging that maybe you don't have the answers, but
Mhm.
referring to a specialist who does. And I think, you know, so for the gold standard diagnosis for endometriosis, you're going to need to have a surgical procedure. And there are sometimes people who are like, just go to someone who can perform the procedure. I'm like, you get with a specialist,
Right.
because if they find adhesions, they can remove those adhesions, and that can make a big difference. Um, and so what you brought up, bleeding and having to change a pad every 30 minutes, not normal. That's menorrhagia. So I have a menorrhagia checklist in the book as well, because some of these, so certainly endometriosis can show up with heavy bleeding. Fibroids can show up with heavy bleeding, endometrial hyperplasia. Like there are things that can show up with heavy bleeding, but you might tell your doctor they're heavy, and your doctor's like, well, like, is it that heavy? Is it really that heavy? Yeah, I'm changing a pad every hour. I have to wear an adult diaper. Like that is too heavy of a period ever to have, and it definitely needs to be investigated. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, and that you had to go to another country in order to get that diagnosis. And something that you bring up about having adhesions outside of the uterus, I think it's important to understand. In medicine we always say they're endometrial like tissues outside of the uterus.
Right.
It is not the same as the endometrium, so it's not exactly the same, but it's similar enough that it's going to respond to the hormones that change throughout your menstrual cycle. And unfortunately, I still see doctors. There was a someone had shared with me a really huge following on TikTok, millions of following. This gynecologist is like, if you have endometriosis, you just need to get a hysterectomy. And I was like,
no.
endometriosis is literally like endometrial-like tissue outside of the uterus. It is found on bowels, so you can have pain with bowel movements. You can have bloody bowel movements, which if you ever have bloody bowel movements, you definitely want to get that checked out, because is it hemorrhoids? Maybe, or it could be something much more serious. You can also have these adhesions showing up on your bladder. They can be showing up there are cases in the lungs where somebody was coughing up blood. They go to their doctor. They're like, endo what? Like, how is this? So because we lack research, there's a whole lot we don't know. But there's still, to me, to not even, like, I know where my expertise stops, but to not even be up to date on information, and to be she can do that surgery, to be in a position to be recommending the removal of an entire organ as if that is going to cure your condition. That I was like, that is just, it's too much. It's too much for me. And I was like, I cannot believe this. And I don't like to call people out. I don't think that the way forward is to start like an us versus them conversation, or to be like, this person's so dumb, or, so people were very disappointed that they were like, why didn't you like call her out by name and all that? And I'm like, because that's going to put her in fight or flight. And she cannot be receptive to information if she feels like she's being attacked. And that's the reality. And instead, I just took to educating that, like, that is not going to cure endometriosis. And unfortunately, there is no cure for endometriosis at this time. And it is something that I think is really important for people to understand, that nutrition and lifestyle can go a very long way with endo. It's not going to be the same for everyone. I see people out there promising like gluten-free is going to be the ticket. For some people, gluten-free does help. People promising just eat paleo, eat keto, like, right? Like, and this doesn't matter what your condition is. There's always that promise. So is that going to be true for you? Maybe. You're going to have to test it. You're going to have to find out. We know an anti-inflammatory diet that focuses on nutrient density and helping you move out your estrogen, which means getting enough fiber so that your bowels get fed. Basically, the organisms get fed. They can help remove estrogen. You support your liver in the estrogen detoxification pathways. These are all really important lifestyle factors. Like, even when you're in pain, a little bit of movement can help with that. Making sure that you are, getting good sleep. This is something that I think it's really overlooked, and we have to understand that when we talk about chronic pain, you need good sleep, because that is how your body heals, it restores, it recovers. It's so important. But people with chronic pain have a very difficult time sleeping, because for you to get good restorative sleep, your cortisol has to come down. Cortisol is a hormone that's controlling inflammation. So we talk about endometriosis, your pain is likely going to be worse at night. Fortunately, melatonin may be helpful, as it is an antioxidant. And these are one of the instances where I'm, in cases will be like, let's try bringing on melatonin. Sometimes we're doing like 10 milligrams of melatonin, because it helps with getting that sleep, and that helps with the whole pain response. But sometimes it has to look like something different. And so in saying all of this, we also have to recognize that you need to have an excision surgeon on the team. Do you need to have that surgery right away? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't want you to be in so much pain that then you are scrambling to find somebody to help you, because that we never make good relationship decisions when our back is against the wall, so to speak. But in addition to that, I never want anyone to feel like they failed because they were doing all the nutrition, they were doing all the lifestyle, they were doing all the things, and yet they still had to have surgery, or they still were in pain. Let me tell you, you would be in a much worse place were you not doing that. And you will also heal from that surgery much quicker and have a better shot at those adhesions not coming back by doing all of those things. And I think we so much get it, this comes back to the top of the conversation. So if anybody missed it, go back and listen where we were talking about that game component around how we eat and how we live and all of that. And we really have to stand back and recognize that with endometriosis, with any chronic health condition, it takes the healthcare team And it is a multifactorial approach. And
Mhm.
as it is with endo, because we don't have that one thing,
Right.
that causes it, that one thing that can treat it, like we don't know, it's a lot of experimentation in terms of you trying to figure out, like, do I feel better when I'm using the pycnogenol? Do I feel better when I'm taking turmeric? Do I feel better with the omega-3 fatty acids? Do I feel better with Pilates exercises rather than, doing like ab crunches? These kinds of things only you can answer. And you've got to track that data, and you've got to respect what's true for you. And I really hope
Absolutely.
people take that to heart, because I see a lot on social media within the endo communities where people find what worked for them. And it is like they found the gospel, the holy grail, but
Mhm.
then they preach it as if it's the only thing that could work for you. And maybe it is, but only you can answer that.
And that's very true. And I'm a part of a lot of those endo communities online, as are many of our listeners, I know. And what works for me may not work for another person. For example, I tried melatonin, and I know that that
Mm-hmm.
works for a lot of people to fall asleep, but I have a specific genetic abnormality that makes melatonin actually make me really hyperactive. And so then I tried passion flower, and that lit up my histamine receptors like crazy, and I was up all night
Mm-hmm.
sneezing. So what eventually ended up working for me, and I don't say working as in I'm pain free every day, but I say what has reduced my pain to the point that I can sit here and have an hour long conversation without having to get up and go to the bathroom, is walking every day. Stretching
Mm-hmm.
my pelvic floor in that way of walking works. And I use something called my sauna space, which is an incredible red light and sauna device. And it,
Mm-hmm.
in some way, I'm the neuroscientist, not the doctor, but in some way helps you produce your own melatonin a bit more
Oh,
easily.
yeah.
And that
Mm-hmm.
has changed my sleep a lot too. And so unfortunately, we
Well,
don't
not to
have.
mention red light therapy and sauna can help with pain as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And unfortunately, we don't have the research to tell us why endometriosis
Mm-hmm.
happens. But I've noticed that for me, it's so much about what I'm exposed to during the day. I lived in New York and LA for most of my life. And then I lived overseas while I was working for the UN in various environments. And what has always worked the best for me is to live rurally, to live away from chemicals and as much away from mold as possible. And
Mm-hmm.
so last year in 2022, I moved from LA out to New Mexico, and I live on the top of a mountain. And yes, I am one of those people who has to drive an hour to see a doctor, but day to day, my breathing is better. So the
Mm-hmm.
whatever I have going on in my lungs, the adenomyosis or whatever we're calling it today, um, it helps me to be out here. And so the
Mm-hmm.
experimentation of what works for you may have to go beyond supplements and diet and those kinds of things, and get even bigger to find a place that actually is more pain-free than where you are now.
Mm-hmm. No, I love all of that. And something you talked about, being in all these communities, community is a huge aspect of all of this as well. Not feeling like you're going it alone, not feeling like you're so isolated can be,
Yeah.
and feeling like when you're talking to other people and they're like, yeah, I know about what you're talking about. And you're like, oh my God, it's not just me. I mean, I think about something as simple as like every time I talk about this phenomenon people call butt lightning, how many, like literally millions of women writing in being like, it's not just me. I feel so validated. It's not just me. I don't feel
Yeah.
alone. We really undervalue like how important it is to have that sense of community. And as you were talking about, I mean, endocrine disruptors, absolutely. We don't understand endometriosis, but we do understand that those with endometriosis, they sometimes exhibit much higher amounts of endocrine disruptors in their body. And why this matters, I had somebody challenge me the other day, and they're like, the endocrine disruptors, are you sure they actually affect your hormones? And I was like,
Yes.
they are called endocrine disruptors. Like, yes, they do affect your hormones. And in fact, I get people that push back on me for things like BPA, and they're like, that's just like made up. That
Oh.
is just fear mongering wellness. I was like, BPA was actually first developed to be a synthetic estrogen. Most people don't know that. It was developed to be a
Wow.
synthetic estrogen, a hormone replacement. So
Yeah.
why? Because it can stimulate the receptors on the cells to elicit changes in the same way that your natural estrogen would to the DNA. They
Mhm.
are very problematic. And so I think, it's such, so let me just say this because I seriously have my own freak out modes. When I was in medical school, sitting in our environmental toxins class, our environmental medicine class is what it was called. But like, I just had moments where I had to like step out and take a breath because I was like, what have we done to the planet?
I
Um,
know.
it is just really, what have we done? And I have really, spent a lot of time counseling patients on this. And the thing that I can say is you control what you can and you let go the rest because
Exactly.
there's so much out of your control. Like
Mhm.
I could start naming off all the companies who are just seriously the worst, and our government protects to no end to keep
It's so
decimating
frustrating.
the environment. You
Yeah.
can't do anything about that. Like you can vote, you can do all
Right.
of this stuff, but in the day to day, what you can do is what you need to focus on. What you put in your mouth, what you clean your house with, what is in your house. Indoor air pollution is one of the most polluted areas. And
Mhm.
this is where opening your windows once a day or at least once a week, because I know it's cold. We were living in Paris for a bit, and we during the winter months, and everybody there opens their windows during the winter. Like you will see
Yeah,
people like opening
absolutely.
them for a period of time. And I was like, this is like totally normal because yes, you need to be doing this. So removing candles from your house, scented candles. My friends, where do you think it goes when it burns?
I know.
Like it's something that like when I explain this to people, so many people are like, I've never thought about that. I'm like, you breathe it. It goes to you. So if
Yeah.
you light candles, maybe you get some battery operated ones, or maybe you get some beeswax, but the scented ones, not going to be your friend. Clean up what's
Mhm.
going on in your car, what you're coming in contact with your car. So I just actually did a post where I shared how BPA is bullshit. And if you see me drinking out of stuff, I'm usually drinking out of like just a pasta jar I recycled. They're like my favorite.
Yeah.
And like stainless steel, things like this. I do the best I can when I'm at my house. I travel with a water bottle, but you will absolutely see me on stage speaking, drinking out of a plastic water bottle. I have to keep doing my job. I'm thirsty, but I'm also not going to stress it and I'm not going to freak out. That was something that was not in my control in that moment.
Mhm.
And I know my body can handle it because I've been taking care of my body this whole time. And I think that is the healthiest way to really come at this is what can I control? What can I not control? And then focus on that. And if you get overwhelmed when you start to deep dive into like, what am I putting on my skin? What's in my house? Like the first thing is cleaning up the kitchen,
Mhm.
getting rid of plastic storage containers, get rid of the chemicals that are coming into contact with your food. So anything on the counter, eating surfaces, just move all of that out. And then you can move on to other areas. Skincare is so expensive. I get it. I know. Phase it out. When you run out of that shampoo, get rid of it. When
Right.
you run out of your sunscreen, maybe you bring in a new one and you just start making those changes gradually so it's not overwhelming. And it's so funny. I just want to own that doctors are kind of like the worst in terms of like they've historically been like, oh, environmental toxins, like that's woo-woo stuff. You're just scaring people. And you even still, after all this research is coming out, we still have a divide where if you were talking to a dermatologist, they will tell you that these things don't matter. Like
I
the
know.
stuff you're putting on your skin, it's such a low amount. Don't worry about it. But if you're talking to anybody in women's health, especially those who work with women who want to become mothers, they're like, do not put it on
Don't.
your skin because
Exactly.
cumulative matters. You
Mhm.
see this split. You'll see very highly trained reproductive endocrinologists out there doing in vitro fertilization being like, do not put this stuff on your skin.
Right.
And if you're scrolling TikTok in the next video, it might be a dermatologist or a primary care doctor or anyone else being like, this doesn't matter. These
Mhm.
like wellness people are trying to fearmonger you. Because in the United States, the indoctrination is we will remove the chemical after years of use when we've proven that it's bad for them. Let them
Mhm.
use it until it's been proven. It is wrong. It should be
Agreed.
you prove that it's safe, undeniably safe, before you ever introduce this into our environment. But that's not the way it works. And doctors and people all around have been indoctrinated to think if my government put it out there, then it's probably fine. And yet, how many times in history have we seen these chemicals come out and they've been retracted. Then
I
like
know.
DDT,
I
like oh
know.
my
And
gosh,
Accutane and all of these other things. And if you
so
look
many
at
things.
what's legal in the US and what's legal in Europe, it is a
Yeah.
massive difference. The US will legalize almost anything if it's going to make money. Whereas if you look at the skin products in Europe, they have so many different ingredients in them that we don't get in our creams and things here in the US.
And better sunscreens,
Better
like actually
sunscreens because
fully
we're still
protected.
using endocrine disruptors because they're cheaper
Mhm.
to use. It's just
Totally.
mind blowing.
Yeah. No, I actually, last year I was in Europe speaking. I'm going back again and I'll be speaking at conferences. And I clear out half of my suitcase to bring back
Hmm.
skincare stuff, to bring back stuff that I'm like,
Agreed.
I love this sunscreen,
Yeah.
but that same company, it's different in the
In the
US.
US, I know.
It's different, and people will like, it's so crazy to compare the labels and to be like, that company in the EU has this really high quality product for a really reasonable price. Like you're
Right.
just shocked by how cheap skincare is overseas. And then to get that product, like what's similar, it is not only going to have the endocrine disruptors in it, it's going to be more expensive as well. And it is like, I'm paying
Shocking.
more
I know.
money for lower quality products. Like, this is just, yeah, I mean, just on the like consumerism side of it, I'm like, that is just bollocks.
I know. It really is. We have kept you over the time we were supposed to keep you, Dr. Jolene Brighten. I'm so excited to have gotten to talk to you a little bit. Can you leave our wonderful listeners with whatever their one top tip for the day would be?
Guard your sleep. My
Yes.
friends, guard your sleep. I actually have a chart in the book. The book has so many graphics and charts, checklists, but I have this chart in the book. This is what I present at medical conferences. And I made it really pretty for the book. I like
It is
need to
really
bring that into
pretty.
my slides. It's really pretty. But I pulled this research because so often I was talking at conferences about sleep, and doctors were like, my patients, they roll their eyes at me. They're like, whatever, sleep, like I can't, like all this stuff. Or the doctor didn't think sleep was that important. But I actually show how it disrupts ovulation, increases inflammation, can lead to diabetes. Like I take you through the thyroid dysfunction just in this one chart, showing you that of what happens with chronic sleep disruption. And if you want to get your sexual desire on point, you want to get your hormones on point, you want to get out of pain, all those kinds of, sleep is so crucial. And not just getting into bed, but getting that deep restorative sleep. So that would be my top tip. I know it's not sexy, but I swear it will change your life.
It is life-changing. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Brighten, and thank you so much for all of the work that you do and all of the free information that you give out on your social media channels. And thank you so much for this book.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was an amazing conversation. I cannot wait to hear what your listeners learned, what's helped them. And certainly, if you're listening to this, if you grab the book, I love hearing like the aha moments that you had, because I read it and I'm like, this is what I think will land. But always after a book comes out, I learn so much from the reader. And then that helps me shape, what do they need next? How can I serve next? What more do we need to be bringing to the table?
Right. Thank you again.
Thank you.